An SCP Foundation scientist is performing an autopsy, but it's not a body on the table in front of them. Instead, it's a large pod that looks like a seed pod from a tree, only many times the size. The scientist cuts into the pod and with both hands, pulls the outer shell open and gasps. He calls over his colleague to see what he has found. The other scientist joins him, expecting to see the seeds that they had anticipated finding inside the pod. But instead, sticking out of the gap that has been created, is a human hand. SCP-936 is an anomalous species of tree superficially resembling the Fagus sylvatica, also known as the European beech tree. The tree is deciduous, meaning it sheds its leaves annually, and self-pollinating, and can be found predominantly in northern and eastern Europe. The SCP Foundation has also isolated clonal colonies of SCP-936 in the countrysides of Finland and the Ukraine. There are likely more colonies across the European continent that the Foundation are still currently unaware of. The roots of SCP-936 trees have been shown to host nitrogen-fixing bacteria, bearing more of a similarity to the legume family than your standard European beech. This has actually been an extremely helpful trait for researchers at the Foundation, as SCP-936 appears superficially non-anomalous for the majority of its life cycle. Testing for unusual nitrogen levels in the roots of the plant may prove useful as an advanced detection method. SCP-936 is a monoecious plant, meaning it bears both male and female flowers. However, during flowering, it is easy for a keen-eyed botanist to spot a 936 tree among regular beeches, due to its unusually high male-to-female flower ratio. This isn't advantageous for a plant, as female flowers are the only ones capable of bearing fruit. Typically, there are only around 12 female flowers on each specimen, growing out of older wood on the tree. Out of these 12, only 6 on average continue to develop, and of these 6, only 1 is truly expected to reach maturity and bear a viable fruit. This fruit is designated SCP-936-1. It develops a green cupule, the botanical term for a cup-shaped organ, wrapping around the fruit or seed, like the hat on an acorn, and rapidly grows to its ripened mass of approximately 85 kilograms, or 187 pounds. During this growth stage, SCP-936 develops denser foliage to make up for its energy expenditure. Foundation scientists have taken these enormous pods and dissected them, only to make an incredible discovery. Each pod contains a thick stem, wrapping around a biological structure pretty much identical to a human body. Designated by the Foundation as SCP-936-2, tissue samples obtained from these structures physiologically resemble human tissue, and are also remarkably functional in most areas, including, but not limited to, a fully functional circulatory system, cerebral activity resembling that of an individual submerged in a sensory deprivation tank. They appear to be somewhat similar to the amniotic sacs present on the anomalous olive trees in SCP-3989, also known as the Bone Orchard, a dangerous sarkic anomaly. However, the entities inside these fruits were aggressive sarkic abominations, rather than biological structures, mostly similar to human bodies. The biggest divergence from typical human biology is the presence of large seed clusters in the bodies of these SCP-936 pseudohumans, which is consistent with non-anomalous fruit. These seeds are dark brown in color and measure about 3 centimeters across. When the SCP-936-1 fruit eventually ripens, the cupule wilts and the stem thickens considerably. The fruit then weakens and bursts, causing the human-like structure inside to fall and hang from the stem, which is typically woven through the cervical area of the body. Interestingly, despite the fact that each specimen is genetically identical, the bodies produced by the 936 trees vary wildly in apparent age, race, sex, and physical appearance. The Foundation hasn't been able to find any predictive factors for what causes these bodies to develop in any particular way. It appears to just be another anomalous element of 936's biology. The seeds found in these bodies have thick skins and typically take 16 months to germinate. However, in the ideal level of soil acidity, which is that with a pH level less than 2, this germination time is cut down to a mere few weeks. SCP-936 was first discovered in Finland after the Foundation began looking into a sudden and unusual spike in suicides. However, the Foundation field agents sent to investigate would soon learn that this had nothing to do with actual suicides occurring in Finland. According to intelligence from a Finnish field agent, the sudden spike instead came from a strange series of deaths that were occurring exclusively in one nearby forest. There, local officials had discovered several nude corpses hanging from the branches of European beech trees. Because the victims could never be identified and the true cause of death seemed impossible to ascertain, the Finnish police filed the deaths as suicides to avoid the extra paperwork. But the strangeness didn't stop there. When victims were buried, over a year later, similar trees soon appeared in the cemetery, with more nude, unidentifiable victims hanging from their branches. They had no idea that they'd been planting seeds this whole time, and neither did the Foundation. Initially, the Foundation believed that the unexplainable deaths were a result of some kind of cognito-hazard. They secured the perimeter around the affected area, under the premise of a widespread bark beetle infection. They then established surveillance over the entire quarantined zone, hoping to observe the anomalous phenomenon unfolding in real time. To the surprise of Foundation researchers, a new corpse was found within the observation area overnight, despite security footage proving that nobody had breached the perimeter. The body had somehow come from within, and much like all the others, it couldn't be identified. When an autopsy was performed on the body, the seeds were first discovered. At this point, a Foundation field agent also identified a pattern. All of the hanging victims were found on the same type of tree. Thorough examination of these trees led to the first procurement of a SCP-936-1 fruit, and by extension, the classification of these trees as SCP-936. Mobile Task Force G8, also known as the Spear Hunters, assisted in the coordinated removal of all SCP-936 trees. In the surrounding 45-kilometer area, seed samples were collected and delivered to Bioresearch Site 104 for containment. The incredible similarities between the physiology of SCP-936-2 structures and human bodies presented a potential application. Could these pseudo-humans end the global transplant crisis by providing compatible synthetic blood and organs for humans in need? If so, it could potentially save or at least improve the conditions of millions of lives worldwide. In order to see if this was a possibility, the Foundation conducted a series of transplant tests on D-Class personnel to test the efficacy of 936-2 to human grafts. In the first experiment, a 25-year-old D-Class was given a 100-centimeter skin graft from a specimen of SCP-936-2. The graft was successful, and the new skin boasted greater mechanical resistance due to the interstitial cellulose fibers present throughout. However, not all aspects of this new skin were an improvement, and incisions made into it took longer to heal than non-anomalous human skin. The new skin also displayed a poorer resistance to UV light than regular skin, perhaps due to the sensitivity gained from time inside the seed pod. In the second experiment, another 25-year-old male D-Class was given a muscle graft from the bicep of an SCP-936-2 specimen. The results of this experiment in particular were incredibly promising. Not only did the graft successfully integrate and behave normally, it experienced atrophy at a far lower rate than regular human muscles. Foundation scientists were encouraged to research further in light of this discovery. A 30-year-old male D-Class was given a kidney transplant from an SCP-936-2 specimen. Unfortunately, this experiment wasn't nearly as positive in its results. While, at first, it appeared that the kidneys functioned properly and even showed remarkable liquid economy, the experiment soon turned sour. The health of the D-Class began to decline, and he died of renal failure within 7 weeks. In the fourth experiment, a digestive system from an SCP-936-2 specimen was transplanted into a 23-year-old female D-Class. While the graft was successful, it caused dramatic physiological changes to the subject. She became emaciated, and they soon learned that her body's digestive process had changed from the regular method to one in which it was absorbing the byproducts of bacterial decay within her stomach. A doctor monitoring the test hypothesized that the human digestive tract was not long enough to support this style of digestion, and the D-class's long-term prognosis did not appear to be a good one. In the 5th experiment, while the details of the graft are largely classified, the researchers did find that with the right transplants, humans could also produce more SCP-936 seeds, which would be useful if the Foundation wished to produce more. In a final experiment, the Foundation used genetic material from the SCP-936-1 specimen to impregnate a 31-year-old female D-class personnel. The procedure appeared to work at first, but ultimately resulted in a non-viable pregnancy. The SCP Foundation also happened upon another interesting fact about SCP-936 by total accident. Just as many organs from SCP-936-2 can be transplanted into humans, SCP-936 is also susceptible to the transfer of disease from humans. During a harvesting session, one of the 2 D-classes working as assistants accidentally transmitted his case of rhinovirus to the plants, causing a crop failure that killed a number of the trees and delayed research considerably. Because of the fact these trees are hard to identify at a glance and could potentially be anywhere across Europe and even the world right now, considerable resources must be leveraged by the Foundation to keep the SCP-936 specimens contained worldwide. As such, it has been classified as Euclid. All contained specimens of SCP-936 are to be kept at Bioresearch Site 104, enclosed by a fence to prevent unauthorized access, and watered daily. The specimens are to be inspected by 2 physically fit members of D-Class personnel once a month for potential SCP-936-1 fruit growth. If the fruit is ripe, harvesting may commence. If not used in Foundation experiments, the pseudo-humans can have their seeds removed and incinerated, and have their flesh fed to carnivorous creatures in containment to prevent waste. Following the rhinovirus incident, people handling the plants are required to wear protective gear to prevent potential infection of the SCP-936 trees. A censored description of the trees has also been distributed to various governments across Europe, marking them as an invasive species to aid in collection and containment efforts.